certain to want to do that.
Did you have both? Just one that was wrong, right? Last week?
Yeah, just one. So. Okay. All right. Well, the last time we met, we spoke about 5 dark globes, globes of chaos and of disorganization relative to cosmos. And with that, we talked about the transcendental spiritual states in which those places of activity were focused. And we talked about them especially relative during manifestation to the evolution of religions. From the evolution of the Father to the evolution of Melchizedek to the different religions of the Holy Spirit, and back up the religion of the Son, S-O-N, and then finally back to the religion of the Father again. And we talked about them being active, probably more active, when manifestation wasn't going on, in that they were active in the breakdown of too much cosmos, or cosmos that was no longer necessary, and the absorption and the assimilation and unified distribution of soul material from manifestation throughout the spirit. Now, these are things that are analogous to our lives. Like in our daily lives, we are busy during the day, and then we go to sleep at night. And when we're asleep at night, we absorb the experience from the day and make it part of us, so that when we wake up, our vehicles are all harmonized, and we are in harmony with the cosmos. And this is something that is even prevalent in our active daily lives. I'm sure all of us have had this situation where we're working on some kind of a task, and we're stymied, and no matter how we work on it, we can't get to what we're trying to get to. Then we take a break. And we take a break and defocus and relax. Suddenly things become clear. And they're clear as they wouldn't have been if we had stayed intensely focused on the material that we were, or what we were doing before we took a break. And that's exactly what happened with regard to this talk. I had every intention to continue on from where we were last time, and then when the class was over and it was mulled in my consciousness that night, and for a few days after, it came clear that if I had followed that course, it would have taken us into a detour to where we want to get to. So, instead of doing that, we're working on the next proposition, a proposition stated in the form of the question of a question, as all of them have been. And ironically, this one will take more than one talk to get through. And the proposition stated in as simple a way as possible is, why Jesus? Now, the question asked that way, or the proposition put that way, is clearly non-sectarian. There is an old adage that I heard from a man from India. It says, God doesn't know religions. Meaning to say, it understands the spirit, but it doesn't have any favorites among religions. Now, some things would be true irrespective of any religious assumptions. There would be a need for redemption through the being that we're calling Christ, though it could be called by any name, whether it came through Jesus or not. The need for redemption and unification and rising above the stew that we've gotten ourselves into would be there irrespective. There would be a religion of the Son, S-O-N, whether it had its roots in Christianity as we see it now, which is far from the true religion of the Son. So that would be the same. And there would be a highest initiate of the highest initiate class of humanity, whether it was Jesus or not Jesus. See, the formula is the same. It's something like a list of players acting out a play. There are, in order to get this concept across through the play, there have to be these different steps that one goes through to get the consciousness across. Doesn't make any difference who the names of the actors are, though some actors can do it better than others, but it's something like that. So it is a formula which is mythic. And when it becomes history, then those things matter. Who it is and who is the acting out of the pre-designed plan in history and the ongoing evolution in the cosmos. That's when things, it's when things become factual that are important. Now, since most of us are in the dark, in our spiritual blindness, we find ourselves in a familiar but exceedingly uncomfortable position of having to proceed with less certain means. Things that are most important to us, we do not have a lot of certainty about. We have intuition, and intuition is certain, but our faith in our own intuition isn't always certain. Intuition presents something to us, and we often don't accept it because we don't have faith in it. And intuition is certain, but the problem of discerning what is intuition or what is wishes that are born out of vanity or desire impulses or just whims, it's not easy for us to see what is intuition and what isn't. And we're such rascals that we want to call things intuition, even though we have a suspicion that they aren't intuition just because we like those things. And that's a place that we are in. We can live according to intuition, or what we think is our intuition, but the stakes are really high. And things, as far as the direction of our path of destiny, especially in a large sense, the stakes are really high, much higher than getting the right 5 or numbers. I don't even know what it is on the lotto jackpot. Talking about our place in the entire rest of the creation. So we can't ever knock intuition, but we always have to be clear about what is and what isn't intuition. It appears to me that whatever is intuition always gives a means that it can be proved. But sometimes the proving is not easy. So in lieu of intuition, which we have only intermittently, we have two things which are very unpleasant to temperaments like our own. and they are faith and belief. Now, even though faith and belief are very unpalatable to us, we are seekers and we want to know the truth. We don't want to have belief and faith. They too, belief and faith can be tested to some extent. For example, if somebody purports to be a seer, you can always check out as much as possible with our limitations if many of the statements are true. If someone is given the status of authority, especially spiritual authority, we can always see if that individual lives a spiritual life, at least as far as limitations allow. I remember one time meeting a man who was supposedly a great spiritual clairvoyant. He wrote an excellent book talking about making correlations between science, art, and religion. It was a superb book, and it would be hard to write a book like that without clairvoyance. And I just wonder how somebody that had this much knowledge and who did so well with it was not a renowned spiritual figure. It doesn't happen that way. There can be some very spiritual people that are unknown. But then one day I was in traffic, and I was behind him, and I saw him cut somebody off at an intersection in the most selfish way possible. That involved the slamming on of brakes and people, and I said, oh, now I see, you know what I mean? That if a person really is what they are purported to be, they wouldn't do something. And it was a really selfish act. So, when we're dealing with authority who makes a claim about a matter, it's much more important when that authority doesn't have anything at stake. It's much more believable. You know, if a person, if somebody is not in any one camp or another and they make a statement and it doesn't affect their own personal well-being, that's a more important thing. It's even more important if the claim goes against the circumstances that the authority would favor. That is, if somebody puts themselves in a position that they're not going to be, they're not, you know, they've got something at stake. They're going to lose something for saying what they're saying. And so that, with regard to the question that we're asking, we're fortunate to have that very situation. In India, the Trinity is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiv. Now, the culture of India is very old, and it's very complex, and it's laid over and laid over and laid over many times. And for that reason, the consciousness of people that are born into that kind of a cultural context and grow up in it is so different than ours. It's very difficult for Westerners to understand what is called Hinduism. There are very deep spiritual thinkers, intellects, but the religion is not separated from mysticism, and the religion is for most common people, for the masses. So a lot of the concepts are made material, even more material than they really are, so that they can be grasped and that the common people who need it can take it to heart. In India, for example, from little children even to older people, ideas of religion are disseminated through comic books. Like you can get on the internet, you can get all kinds of comic books that are about the Indian religion. For this reason, in the religion of India, esoteric, exoteric, doesn't make any difference, the Trinity is conceived not as personifications, but perceived as gods. The religion of the Father, or the religion of the Son, or the religion of the Holy Ghost, none of those things are mentioned in Hinduism, at least as far as I know. I've looked into it somewhat, but it's just too enormous for me. However, some facets of the teaching are found in de facto in that religion. There are what are called incarnations of Vishnu. Vishnu corresponding to life spirit, and the Christ as the personification thereof in Western terms. Vishnu is the life spirit, and the followers of Vishnu are called Vaishnavas. Vaishnavas, is that correct?
Vaishnavas, yeah.
Okay. You're gonna have to. I'm all right as long as I don't see you breaking your teeth. According to the followers of Vishnu, there are 10 incarnations of Vishnu. And the 10 that are incarnations are called avatars. Unlike, they're not like the movie, the avatars. They're not like those little mannequins that you put on the internet to be somebody other than yourself. They are receivers of the spirit, of the life spirit. Most of the incarnations of Vishnu are pretty well unknown to Westerners. Only 3 of the last 4 are known at all in the Western world. They are the oldest being Rama, the next oldest being Krishna, and most recent, Buddha. The final incarnation of all, the one that comes after Buddha, is called Kalki. Kalki. Now, in the person of Kalki is to be the only complete incarnation of Vishnu come to walk on earth as a human. All of the other incarnations were overshadowings or conscious interpenetrations or something like that. Now, many of the mysteries of the East, both Hindu and Buddhist, were expressed in their esoteric sense by Madame Blavatsky, though she's not highly accepted by all India because she was so unusual, and they just couldn't accept her at all. She had 2 Hindu advisors. One of them was a man called Moni Chatterjee, and the other one was a man called H.T. Subarao. And she referred to them on all things Hindu, at least the ones that she didn't claim to receive from the masters. Now, I couldn't find the reference, but one of them stated in print that Jesus was the first full incarnation of Vishnu. Now, he was savvy enough to know what would happen if he would say that Jesus was Kalki, so he didn't say that. He just said that this was the only incarnation to date of Vishnu completely into a human. But in saying that, this is remarkable. And this is exactly the testament that we're looking from, because he had everything to lose and nothing to gain as an independent non-Christian to say what he said. And it's exactly what we're looking for. It's testimony that Jesus, according to a clairvoyant, was indeed a full incarnation of life spirit. There was another theosophist named Jeffrey Hodson, and he had a similar dilemma. He was a very excellent clairvoyant. He was very reliable. I remember back in the 70s, I read a book by him, and he says, well, when you get to the surface of Mars, it's basically just covered with orange sand. And I thought, whoa, what is this? To be able to make a statement factual like that. Now we have rovers on Mars, and Mars, the surface of it is basically covered with orange sand. So this is somebody that was not afraid to state what he saw. He saw the same thing about Jesus, but he had to be very careful about how he said it, because he was in the Theosophical Society and well situated in the Theosophical Society, and his whole, how would you call it, infrastructure with the world was through the Theosophical Society. And the Theosophical Society has basically, it isn't a written dogma, but the statement of the Theosophical Society is that all great teachers are equal. And if he said that Jesus was something different or was a special case, he would have found himself out of the society. So what he did is he published in a very obscure periodical called New Zealand Theosophist. I don't think you could even find it on the web. He published exactly the same thing, that Jesus was indeed the incarnation. Now, Rudolf Steiner had, Tim starts shuddering as soon as I start talking, was in a similar dilemma. He, from his clairvoyance, knew about the incarnation. And he knew it was a fact and not a belief. And this caused a great deal of uproar in the Theosophical Society when he would say something like Christianity is a mystical fact and it's not a religion and it's not like your teacher is better than mine. He had great integrity, and he wouldn't retreat from his statement. So what he had to do is he had to withdraw from the Theosophical Society. Now, in all of this, beside the fact that it establishes that seers of various sorts that prove to be very reliable in things see the same thing but in very different terms, there are some things about this all that are extremely interesting to me. And they go beyond verifying the incarnation. One is how humanity is prepared well in advance. A few minutes ago I said I didn't know that they taught the religion of the sun in what is called Hinduism. But nonetheless, it's in the teaching, and people are prepared that through 10 stages, a whole different way is coming about. And in this whole different way, divinity, part of the Trinity itself, is going to be living among humans in a human bodies. Now it's all wrapped up. You know, a lot of the avatars are even in animal-like forms, so there are things here that may be indicating something that is symbolic evolution or something like that. I think the first one was a fish incarnation, wasn't it?
It
Yeah, it is. It's an evolutionary statement showing where we're going.
I think the early one you fished, it might not have been the first. Was
Okay.
it first?
I think remember
I thought it
it was
might have been.
amphibian and then.
Well, I mean, it's,
But in any case, the point is well made that we are prepared and made ready for way ahead of time before something happens. Another thing is something that I find really, really fascinating, and it makes you want to pull your hair out. Of all of the aforementioned clairvoyants, only Rudolf Steiner talked about the enormous importance of the incarnation. And that is fascinating. Here we have something that is really, really important, that represents a whole new way of life, a way of life where self is given over to something that transcends self, and it just isn't mentioned by the others. And that's, I don't, that just, you say, what's going on here? I suppose it is like perception. You can perceive things and not really know what you're perceiving and the importance of it. I'll give you a really strange example. There is a mountain in Venezuela that is almost inaccessible, but there are many, many, many species that are found only on that mountain. And before you can get on that mountain, you have to have the permission of the Indians. It is an international sacred trust that this mountain is for, and you cannot take anything from that mountain. You cannot. But in that mountain, at the top, there is a cave. And in that cave, there is a life form that is not based on the hydrocarbons. It's based on the hydrosilicates. Do you know what that means? It means that there can be forms that can live in environments other than our own, because the silicates would be able to take much more heat. Of course, all the UFO people jump on this right away and say this is proof of the of the UFOs, which it really isn't. But it's just, one little fact like that is of amazing importance. It should wake up all of science. Because every now and then you hear an astronomer say, there's not life on other planets. There are not forms on other planets like our own, but there certainly is life. But that's something that, hasn't gotten across yet. Now, years ago, I used to work for the post office downtown. And I chummed around with a woman named Shirley. And one night, Shirley and I were walking on the square. And we encountered a man that was wearing a bright red jacket. Shirley thought it was orange. Not red orange, because it wasn't even nowhere near red orange. It was just plain red. And we fought over this. I said, how can you possibly think that that jacket is orange? There seemed to be no evidence or no reason or anything ideological for her to insist on her stand. And now we're talking regular sensory vision, ocular vision, that there are such differences in perception. It's shocking how different people can see the same set of facts in very different ways. Now, when we come to clairvoyance, we encounter that very thing. Because in clairvoyance, you're open to a whole lot of information. And a lot of the information is of a much higher order. but it also introduces a whole lot of problems. So for the rest of this talk, and probably the rest of the next talk, we're going to encounter some of those problems of early clairvoyance in humans and the controversy that comes out of those observations. I don't like controversy anymore. When controversy gets too heavy, you'll see me start to shake. I don't like to argue. I will try to be very open to resolve controversial differences and the things that are reported by various clairvoyants, some of which seem to be completely antithetical to each other. Now, I'll try to do that without having a foot in any camp. Now, it's true, as all of you know, I'm deeply involved with the Rosicrucian Fellowship as founded by Max Heindel. But I am more committed to truth than I am committed to the Rosicrucian Fellowship or Max Heindel. So in presenting the information here, people from all camps involved may be angry with me or scandalized by what I have to say, but I just have to be as truthful as I can about it. I can't say that I know it all in a completely factual way, but if I don't go into it, it's things are not going to ever be cleared up, at least as far as me. And if somebody would like to rebut anything that I have to say, I would like to do so formally or informally. I'm open to that if you'd like to talk to the entire class. Now, fortunately, most of the points of controversy are not of critical importance. Some are of moderate importance, but not critical. In most things, there is agreement. In fact, I have found that most of the areas of disagreement and strife and intellectual warfare and all of that is among zealous followers. And I don't like zealous followers at all. I think all the leaders that have zealous followers would like to take all their followers to task if they could. It is silly that people should bicker over some of the small points of the incarnation mystery and do so in very unchristian ways. We don't want to be distracted in that way. Now, so far we have seen that the purported incarnation of Christ into the personality of Jesus has been reported by clairvoyants who are not Christian mystics. This helps us proceed into the reports of Christian mystics with some degree of confidence. We have an idea that we're on the right track. However, we have not answered the question, why Jesus and not some other highly evolved human? Now, in this, as in many mystical things, there are multiple answers. Let's begin with a simple answer along some of the lines that we have been following for the last several talks. We have been looking at the character of the three personifications of the Godhead and the three attributes of the One. We can look at the powers of those personifications or of those attributes. Truly, each of the spiritual worlds is a manifestation of the macrocosmic spirit. And being that, it has, each of the states of spirit has many, many, many sides to it, many meanings. Even the human spirit, which is the third member, and that is located in the region of abstract thought, or in the subdivision of thought called the subdivision of abstract thought, is very multifaceted. It's the realm of ideas. And there are ideas about forms, and there are ideas about life, and there are ideas about emotions. And that right there, there are all kinds of ideas that come from that. However, each of the personifications or attributes has its own purpose. And each of the personifications has its own evolutionary experiences that are relevant to it being a representation of the attribute of the one. There are differences in talents, and there are differences in powers. This is something that mystics of all ages pretty much agree upon. So that if you look at the Greeks, or if you look in India, you find the same thing. The powers of the threefold spirit, just about ubiquitously, are willing, feeling, and thinking. Respectively, the divine spirit, the life spirit, and the human spirit. Therefore, according to this, Christ would be the feeler, relatively speaking. Therefore, for the incarnation to be optimal, it would be best for the human host to be a feeler also, because the personality that it would have to work through would be more harmonious with the being working through that personality than elsewise. Now, to get at this, let's go back to the symbolical, mythical first family. Now, according to the most commonly accepted story, that is the Bible story, the Gnostics have their own version of the story, which is a very good one, and perhaps even more true in some ways. But according to the commonly accepted story, the first family consisted of Adam and Eve's 3 children, Cain, Abel, and Seth. There are other variants. Some, for example, in Kabbalistic literature have Adam having another wife, I believe first, called Lilith, but they're not germane to the myth that gets us to where we need to get to. Though not included in the Christian Bible, but mentioned in other Kabbalistic writings, such as the Gnostics, in the Nag Hammadi library, it says so outright that Cain is the son of Eve and the Lucifer spirit. The name that is given in some cases is Samael. This is a reference to the soul union of the Lucifers with humans embodied in female bodies during those times in Lemuria. And some people took in them, that the nature of the Lucifers took in their consciousness, and their consciousness was forever changed. There was an inner vision, and the Lucifers were seen as spiritual beings rising up the spine, which, like serpents, which is where the Garden of Eden story has serpents in it. Now, in this form, Lucifer spirits couldn't remain. They couldn't hang in a body full time because it's foreign to them. They could enter into some of our inner vehicles and influence us, but they couldn't incarnate into this kind of body. And the people, or the spirits of our human life ways in which this took, are the descendants of Cain. And they are referred to in the Bible as children of the widow. You can find references throughout the Bible where it says things like take care of children of the widow or things like that. Now, the externalization, actually, it's how to say this. After the fall, our externalization of consciousness was accelerated. We were not inwardly as focused as much as we had been before, and when we tried to build new bodies at will, our consciousness became externalized, and it was very much sped up. And it's even found in the writing of the Bible. Following the death of Abel at the hands of Cain, we'll come back to this story next time again, but looking at it in a different way. Adam knew Eve, and she bore Seth. We're talking about sensory knowledge. It is called carnal knowledge. Previously, our consciousness was internal. And we were brought into procreation without even knowing that we were really united with other beings outside of us. It was all guided by the divine hierarchies. And the Lucifers wanted to separate us from that. And they had their own ends in mind. So the union of Adam and Eve that resulted in Seth was not divinely controlled. And it wasn't necessarily luciferically controlled. It happens later. And it is called the union of humans, or the way the Bible uses it with the sexist terms is man. So consequently, all of the children of Seth down through the Bible are called sons of men. And if you look in the Bible, at least I've never counted, but I think references to sons of men are much more frequent than sons of widows. This is the story form. Many spiritual things are mentioned in story form. But if they are true spiritual myths, there is a consistency. And there is significant information in the story. The children of Cain are frequently called children of fire. And their temperament is ambitious and enterprising. Story form, this is because they are children of a demigod. Lucifer being a semi-divine human being, and so they have, so to speak, in their blood creativity. The temperament of the sons of Seth is much more humble, much more obedient, and needing authority and structure and things like that. From the onset, the children of Seth were called feelers, and they are called children of water. So we have children of fire, and we have children of water. This is something that's very big, and it's very difficult to get at without a deep and well-trained clairvoyance. It's so deep that it goes beyond gender. You can be a fireling or a waterling and go through successive lives as male, female, and you can go through many of them and still you remain a child of fire. This is also something that is deeper than astrology, because there's no way you can look at a horoscope except with intuition and say that this is a child of fire. You have to know something beyond that. It's something very deep. Something like the teaching of father stars or things like that. So there's obviously a very long history of development of two temperaments. This is something that runs through the whole creation story. That, for example, just in terms of the dissolution of creation. Sometimes it's by fire, and then the next time it's by water. It's the basis of that old Negro spiritual that says, no more water, but a fire next time, when it talks about the death of everything. Now, according to mythical history, which is definitely not the same thing as history, Solomon, who built the temple, which is not the temple that we see in Jerusalem, was a waterling. And he got the plan from heaven, and he couldn't build it himself. Hiram did the actual building, and Hiram was a fireling. Now, being cut off from the Spirit, we're insecure as well as being sinful as a result of the fall. And we're suspicious in our insecurity. Consequently, we have to try to prove that we're right. And there's been a tremendous rivalry between the children of fire and the children of water. Now, in the most generic sense, the children of fire are called Masons, and the children of water are called Catholics. Now, even though there are organizations with those names in the world now, though the term is meant as a generic, and it's not meant necessarily those religions. In fact, there are practicing Catholics who are probably firelings. The great cathedral, but in general, the Roman Catholic Church is basically a Catholic institution. And all of the cathedrals that were commissioned by the Roman Catholic Church were built by Freemasons. And if you look, usually in a lot of those large stained glass windows, you'll find Masonic symbols. And some of them, if you look at them from a distance, you can even see the Masonic square and compass. So this is something that's been going on, and there have been a lot of strife and enmity. Sometimes it's very open. The most advanced of firelings are called occultists or occultists in the highest sense. And the most advanced of the waterlings are called mystics, meaning those who approach the higher spiritual life by feelings. So the story of the building of the temple, at least according to the Masonic myth, is different than the story which is given in the Bible. This is because the Bible was written by waterlings who were the darlings of Jehovah. You can't expect them to have a neutral, unbiased view of presentation. According to esoteric lore, both groups were fallen and both were given help according to their needs. Supposedly, in the Atlantean epoch, which succeeded the Lemurian epoch, help was sent in the form of humans from Mercury and Venus. Obviously, if they came from Mercury and Venus, they didn't have hydrocarbon bodies like our own. And they were people who were lagging in their own evolution, and they played catch-up by helping us, who were serious, more than laggers. As far as I understand it, and my understanding of this is worth question, the Venusians worked primarily with waterlings. They established priesthoods and divine kings and a lot of moral and religious institutions to guide humanity. The Mercurians provided practical assistance to the firelings. They gave practical sciences like agriculture, and much of what we call science is a result of them. The Mercurians also established the path of initiation, which is the path for occultists and not the path for mystics. To this day, they are referred to in literature as the Mercurial Mysteries. And the emblem of healers, like doctors, for example, is the caduceus of Mercury, because healing was one of the things they were taught. Now, according to the lore, the building of the temple was the first attempt to bring the two streams together. Solomon and Hiram were friends, though they were rivals of each other. But Hiram had the fault of the firelings, pride. And when the temple was built, he was going to build this molten sea, which was to dissolve and melt all of the elements into it, and it would be clear union of all. It would basically be a dissolution back into the ethers, only pellucidly clear. And this was exceeding the plan and exceeding the intent. It was what is indicated of in the book of Revelations, where it talks about all the elements being melted, or everything becoming a crystalline clear substance or crystalline clear state. The waterlings were, obviously, they thought this was sacrilege, and they were jealous, and the whole thing happened when the waterlings poured water into the molten sea, and the whole thing exploded. It was a blow up in the truest sense of the word. Now, according to the reports of people who appear to be credible clairvoyants, Solomon was reborn as Jesus, and Hiram was reborn as the friend of Jesus, Lazarus, the friend that he seemingly raised from the dead. Jesus, in whose body was referred to by Christ as the Son of Man, would be a waterling and a feeler, and much better suited for a vehicle of Christ than who was the feeler of the Trinity. Now, this would seem to wrap things up very nicely, but it doesn't. Two of the more reliable clairvoyants and voices for Christian mysticism are Max Heindel and Rudolf Steiner. Both speak of the relationship of Solomon to Jesus, but both have difficulties with regard to this watery relationship. In Max Heindel, there is an apparent inconsistency. In one place in his writings, he says something to the effect that feelings and waterlings or mystics reach the same degree of consciousness, but by different means. And he says mystics do not attain, they attain by devotion and not by initiation. Then in another place, he says that Jesus is the rebirth of Solomon, and that Jesus had initiations. So there is an apparent contradiction. Now, I don't think this is an outright contradiction, and I don't think that it's irreconcilable. Well, if one of the works was of Christ to unite the firelings and waterlings, it's conceivable that Jesus would be brought through initiations so that that personality would have both the characteristic of a fireling and of a waterling. Now that seems like a rational resolution of a contradiction, but I can't say, whether that is the answer or whether it is just a rationalization. We're speaking about states of consciousness and means to reaching these states through initiation. it doesn't seem reasonable that advanced states of consciousness are so inflexible and so bound up in temperament that it has to always be that way. It doesn't make sense because the deeper the spiritual consciousness that someone has, the greater the open-mindedness there is and the greater the flexibility. It doesn't go against fact, but it just seems much more reliable to me. Especially since the second attribute of the Godhead is not only the feeler, it is the love-wisdom principle. And love-wisdom has both characteristics about it, and therefore you would think that a personification would have to have both things about it. The problem that I, as an individual, have with Rudolf Steiner is much different. And it has to do with intent and mostly with culture. By his own word, Steiner wrote and spoke, especially with the spoken word, not to impart information. He would find the idea of giving out information as being offensive to his finer sensibilities. What he intended to do was create an atmosphere, and that the hearer or the reader could follow that atmosphere, and they could then come to where he was trying to bring them. So everything he did, basically he tried to do, was make everything a spiritual exercise. Now his culture and his sensitivity was very different from us, especially us in the United States in the 21st century. And for me, it's very hard to get objective factuality from Steiner. Factuality that I can prove, especially in Christology. I've read a dozen or more of the books by Steiner on the Christology, and I have never found simple, straightforward, objective statements that about the nature of Christ that I could make deductions from. There are many, many indefinite allusions to Christ as being, for example, one of the Elohim and things like that, but nothing that I could get a deduction from. Now I realize that this might be due to the inferiority of my own soul nature, and that someday I may think differently about it. But from now, for the present, I don't understand his point relative to the firelings and waterlings in the nature of the incarnation. Now, one of his followers, a man named Albert Steffen, who was a Swiss playwright, did write a play on the subject, and I don't know, I haven't read that, so I can't say. But at any rate, we got, the whole talk is ironic, because we got objective information from non-Christian sources, and we got some clarity, especially about the importance of the whole business of the incarnation from Christian sources, but there are things that are also problematic in the Christian sources, which hopefully we can resolve when our consciousness is more clear. And I hope that mentioning the things that I've mentioned is helpful to each of you in trying to understand the incarnation mystery. Now there's much more to come, and it gets much more difficult than this, and we're going to take that up when we begin next time from this point. Yeah. I am going to walk, but I'm going to walk slower because I had a hard time getting out of bed this morning.
That's